It's Kim from the Pennington Public Library. Thank you for joining us for a conversation with author Mariah Fredericks. If you have any questions during this program, please feel free to write them into the Q&A section, and I will integrate them throughout the conversation. Please place all their comments in the chat window, as many of you guys have discovered. Now, allow me to introduce Mariah Fredericks. Mariah Fredericks was born, raised, and still lives in New York City. She graduated from Vassar College with a degree in history. She is the author of the Jane Prescott Mystery Series, which has twice been nominated for the Mary Higgins Clark Award. The Lindbergh Nanny, her first standalone novel, was nominated for the Agatha and Anthony Awards. And The Wharton Plot was named one of Library Journal's best crime novels of the year. Her new novel, The Girl in the Green Dress, featuring New Yorker writer Morris Markey and Zelda Fitzgerald, will be published very soon on September 2nd. Welcome, Mariah. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm so excited to speak to you.
Hi, Kim.
Hello. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure.
Oh, it's wonderful. Mariah, I think I had mentioned to you, one of the reasons why we had chosen to feature the Lindbergh Nanny for our book group is because here in Pennington, we are in the backyard of all of this drama in Hopewell.
So it's familiar territory.
Familiar territory, yes, for us. And then, not to be outdone, you then started featuring the Wharton Plot in New York. So
yeah, we had to get back to home turf.
Yes, yes. Now, Mariah, these two books are your first standalone novels.
Yes.
How did you adjust or segue into writing a series such as the Jane Prescott series into writing a standalone novel? Like, how was that process for you?
Well, I'll be honest and say it was a little brutal because I loved Jane and I loved the cast of characters around Jane. And after the fourth book came out, COVID hit, and I was frantic. I wanted to be anywhere other than in present time. And I thought, let me just go back to Jane. And the publisher said, this is not, the numbers aren't looking the way that we would like them to look, but we like you and we'd like you to write a standalone mystery. And I thought, oh my God, if the series had gotten nice reviews and some award attention, I thought, if that isn't enough, what can I write about that will make people immediately want to pick up that book? And I proposed many ideas to my agent, and she did not like any of them. And I remember where I was standing in my house when I came up with the idea of the Lindbergh Nanny, and I immediately called her and described the idea, and she said, yep, I think this is the one we're proposing. So because I felt so strongly the idea would be interesting, that sort of eased the pain of leaving the series.
Oh, and you have some slides to share with us this evening.
I do.
And feel free to share your slides.
Okay. All right.
So this is our cast of characters, or our leading ladies.
Our leading ladies, exactly. This is Betty Gow. I believe this is at the Houtman trial, and this is Mrs. Wharton. So you can see they're very they're different women.
Yeah.
But Betty is a tiny woman in the servant class. Edith is magisterial and aristocratic. And was two very interesting points of view to be looking at murder.
And remind me, how old is Betty around during this time of the trial?
Betty, well, at the time of the trial, she would have been about 33 or 4. At the time of the kidnapping, she was 28 or 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And how old is Edith in your portrayal of her? You could remind me of.
Edith it's very interesting. Edith, as she solves the murder of David Graham Phillips, is about to turn 49. And one of the reasons that she becomes interested is that he died on her birthday. And that's historically true, interestingly. It was one of the things that made me feel they had to come together in a story.
Yeah, definitely. And so you had a very distinct memory of when you came up with the idea for the Lindbergh Nanny. Could you uh, recount that for our audience?
Absolutely. Well, the way that I got interested in the story was in 1974, my parents did a really stupid thing, and they took me to see Murder on the Orient Express, and I was one of those very anxious children that you always had to reassure there was nothing in the closet. The rumbling of the street was the subway, not an earthquake. And for people who remember this film, it starts with the kidnapping of little Daisy Armstrong, which of course was inspired by the Lindbergh kidnapping.
Mm.
And the silent montage ends with a screaming headline of Little Daisy Found Slain. And that blew a big hole in my parents' narrative that nothing bad happens to children. And I've remained fixated with the case ever since. So when I was thinking, what is something that just hits a primal nerve with people interested in crime, but also people interested in domestic trauma or tragedy, famous controversial figures in American history. I thought, oh, right. The Lindbergh kidnapping, I remembered that in that montage, it opens with a nanny, tied to a chair and struggling. And I thought, wait a minute, was that a real person? And if so, why
Mhm.
have I never heard of her? And that was what led me to look up Betty Gow.
So, so you thought of the Lindbergh case and then you thought of Betty, or was this the image that just made you think of?
It was the image of because I had been writing the Jane Prescott series,
Yes.
which is a ladies' maid series because I always like the idea of what people who are not supposed to be seen or heard can see and overhear. So my instinct was to tell the story of a famous crime from a domestic staff person's point of view. Um,
Okay.
and of course, Christie's novel is largely concerned with the domestic staff, so that was what
Hmm.
the flow of connection was.
That's great. Now, when you were researching Betty, did you find out information about her, and what were some of the unique aspects of her that you discovered?
Oh, Betty, let's see, I'm gonna see if I can find a portrait of Betty. So this was my initial view of Betty Gow. I think, to my knowledge, it's the only picture of her and Charlie ever taken. And it's a really interesting shot in that it's not a happy image. And if you've read the book, you know what moment this is. But she's sort of scowling. She's a little hostile. Poor little Charlie is peeping up over the edge of the carriage. And I thought this is a really interesting and ambivalent image of the young woman who's going to be at the center of the novel because I didn't know much about her.
Hmm.
And at the heart of Christie's novel is the fact that the police suspected that the kidnapping was an inside job. They felt that one of the staff members, either of the Lindbergh household or Anne's mother's household, had collaborated with the kidnappers. And of course, the prime
Mm.
suspect was Betty, because she was the last person to see Charlie alive. And from this picture, I thought, I'm not actually sure. what I think. So I went with a few different visions of how we could tell this story, but the more I learned about Betty, a fuller image came to mind, came to view.
And what type of information did you find about Betty? Because, as you mentioned, not many people knew about Betty,
Right, right.
and and I, you know, were there a lot of articles about her? Did she reveal much
There
at that
were,
time?
she was basically the story in the beginning of the kidnapping, if I'll share another slide. Um, does Betty Gow hold the key to the Lindbergh kidnapping? Because she was an attractive young woman working in the household of the most famous man in America. She was basically tabloid fodder. However, that doesn't tell you much about who she really was as a
Hmm.
person. We had some letters. She was interviewed over the course of decades about the crime. But the real break for me, researching this, there's certainly no shortage of secondary books. You have also the biographies of Charles Lindbergh by A. Scott Berg and Anne Morrow Lindbergh's memoirs and biographies. But where Betty really came to life for me was in the documents held at the New Jersey State Police Museum, which, as some people in your audience might know, they hold all the police statements, the police interview transcripts, all the doors that they knocked on. Now, I started this novel at the beginning of COVID, as I said. Everything was in lockdown. I couldn't go view those documents, but I thought,
Um,
oh, we'll only be locked down for a few weeks. It'll be fine. I'll get there. And out of the blue, somebody who is here tonight, Douglas Harrell, wrote to me and he said, "Hi, we actually met at the Mystery Writers of America conference or a meeting, and I see in Publishers Weekly that you're writing a book on the Lindbergh kidnapping. I am as well. I have the documents from the museum digitally. Would you like me to share them with you?" Now, this is extraordinary for somebody to be so
wow.
generous with that wealth of information. And because he did that, I was able to hear Betty's voice in a way I never would have heard her voice. When she was being interrogated by the police, how did she sound when she was being evasive? How did she sound when she was trying to appeal to them and connect to them or be cooperative? It was, what was their view of her? Um, I was able to read her statement. I got a more sense of her through the trial transcripts, which were printed in the newspaper. So it was really about finding Betty's voice, and those documents were absolutely essential, and I'm always grateful to Doug for providing those.
Oh, well, thank you, Doug, and thank you for
Thank you,
joining
Doug.
us. Yes. So, if I'm reading the book myself, Betty is a very, um, she's like a character that I could really empathize with. So I'm
Yes,
taking that through your research. You really found a lot of empathy for Betty. And
yes. Um, yeah, she was she was a slight, she's a young woman. She was very bright. She could be a little, I wouldn't say prickly, but some people found her, one employer said that she was haughty. And some of the policemen felt she was a little too cool. But nobody really seemed to seriously question whether or not she loved Charlie. Um,
okay.
and the trauma of that loss was clear. And there was an extraordinary story when A. Scott Berg went to interview her decades later, and she was in her 70s. And by that time, Colonel Lindbergh was dead. But, Byrd describes her as a sort of feisty little Glaswegian woman. He said, she's going to be in control here. It's very clear. And he said Anne Laura Lindbergh sends her regards. And he said this tough little woman suddenly dissolved in tears. And he was like, oh my God, what's wrong? What's wrong? And when she had returned to Scotland, she wrote the Lindberghs a letter, about Charlie and how much he meant to her, and they never answered. And she always felt that that meant that they blamed her for his loss. And she lived with that for decades and decades. So that just sort of tore my heart out.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
so do you have any other images of some of the other characters in the historical figures who are featured in your book?
I do. I do. Here is the cast of characters of the Lindbergh Nanny. Let's see. Well, you're just missing Betty because of us. This is Betty Gow, as you can see. She's a petite, attractive young lady. I think this is Doug might be able to tell me. I think it's at the Lindbergh Hopewell house. So she's sort of the center of the book. And what was extraordinary about her was how deeply engaged in this crime she was. She was Charlie's primary caregiver for the last year of his life. She was the first to discover he was missing, the last person to see him alive, and for a time she was the prime suspect. Now the police decided she was, spoiler alert, not guilty, but then they turned their attention to her boyfriend, this young man here, Henry Rigg Johnson, who was a young Norwegian. He was not in the country legally, so he was having some difficulty finding steady work, and he was broke at the time of the kidnapping, which of course the police found extremely suspicious. And Betty was nearing 30, so they wondered if she had helped him kidnap Charlie for the ransom money, believing that he would return him alive, but then they could get married. Um, Another key person is this young woman sitting here, Violet Sharp, who was a table maid for the Moros. And she became the most controversial suspect. When you read her interviews, she is evasive. She does lie. And the police were very focused on her. This is her with her sister, Edna, who also worked for the Moros. And poor Violet committed suicide. And her suicide is actually what drew Christie to pay attention to the case, because it became a huge source of huge outrage in England. Most of the staff was English or Scottish, and they felt that an English citizen had been browbeaten and tortured by the American police into committing suicide.
Mm.
This Violet is an interesting case. She was also at the time having an affair with the Moro butler, Septimus Banks. As you can see, he's a very proper, dapper man. He was also a fairly unstable alcoholic. I wouldn't say that the Moros had ideal hiring practices. And then we have one of the most sympathetic members of the staff, which is Elsie Whately. Elsie and Ollie Whately were a married couple from the north of England, and Elsie cooked and cleaned for the Lindberghs.
Okay. Now, what was the most surprising aspect you learned about these historical figures when you did your research on them?
In a way, what was startling, if you're looking at it from the point of view of who do I think cracked and collaborated either knowingly or unknowingly
Yeah.
with the kidnapper, they all had fragile points. They all had reasons that you could say that they had done it. And at one point, I was even thinking, do we want to do a reverse murder on the Orient Express where they're all involved? Um,
Oh,
but I thought
wow.
that would strain credulity. Um, I think, as I say, what all of these people's lives were drastically affected by this crime. They had, Septimus Banks was institutionalized. Henry dies very young. Um, they were, so I think the fact that they suffered so much and that they've been lost to history, was very startling to me.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you mentioned thinking about doing having them all involved somehow. So how do you balance historical accuracy with the fictional elements of your stories?
Oh, that's a really good question. I've done now 3 books based on true crimes and real people, and I've used different approaches with each one. With Lindbergh, because the crime is so well known, and there are legions of very knowledgeable armchair scholars, not to mention professional scholars, and I was putting forth a theory about what happened. I felt it was essential to be really, really precise and stick to the known facts of the case. Very late in the game, I wrote to my editor and I said, we have to move the French windows in the nursery because I have them in the wrong place.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and she was like, we're really close to going on press. And I was like, I know it's a pain, but really, trust me, we don't want these emails. I think I deviated only in a few places and I put those in the author notes and explained why. With Edith, I took a different approach.
Okay. Oh, can we see the cast of characters from the Wharton Plot too?
Absolutely. Here we
I
go.
hope I hope we're not making everyone too dizzy going back and forth between the two books.
Let's see. I think we're
But
missing. This is Henry James, which you can tell from the sort of self-important
okay,
waistcoat.
okay, okay. So
Um,
we're jumping to a different time period now. So we're
Different time.
yeah,
Little
we're jumping.
here.
Yeah, so we're in New York now, right? And
Yes.
we're in the
New York,
early 1900s.
1911.
Okay,
And in
all right.
1911, our victim, David Graham Phillips, who was,
Oh, the left here.
yes, here, looking boyish and thoughtful and serious, was shot in broad daylight in Gramercy Park. He was a very well-known reporter and novelist, who liked to write on the subject of women, and he was shot in broad daylight outside of the Princeton Club, which had until very recently been Stanford White's old home. So the clash of the modern and the old Gilded Age was
Hmm.
right there in the murder. So here, of course, we have Edith, our heroine. This is probably a publicity shot taken by her publisher. They like to show her as a grande dame, so that readers felt they were getting the inside scoop into elite aristocratic New York. In 1911, Edith is going through a midlife crisis. She wants to leave America. She wants to leave her publisher. She's fed up with New York, as all New Yorkers eventually reach that point where they're like, ah, I can't stand this city anymore. And most of all, she wanted to leave her husband, this gentleman here, Teddy Wharton, seen with the couple's few shared passions, which were dogs. And in 1910, 1911, Teddy was mentally ill, and his care and health took up a lot of Edith's emotional energy and time, and she had kind of had it. He had recently been caught having an affair, and Edith had recently had an affair. Um, Many people thought it was this man. Walter Berry, who was her oldest friend and who I think was the love of her life. When he died, that's what she called him.
Oh.
But they were not having an affair. She was having an affair with this gentleman, Morton Fullerton, who was a journalist who seems to have slept with half of the cultural and aristocratic elite of Europe. Um, you can't quite see it here, but apparently he was irresistible and he treated Edith very badly. And this is Henry James. Unfortunately, we can't see his face, but he was a dear friend. And around the time of the Phillips murder, she invited all three of these men to dinner and said, "What should I do with my life?" Um, Also, in the novel, we have some friends of David Graham Phillips. These are William and Anna Walling, and they're a very different class than this group here, although William Walling was actually quite rich. They are socialists, they are progressive, they're deeply involved in labor and racial equality causes. Anna is actually Russian and she is a novelist. And the pair will finally divorce not because of his infidelity, but because they could not agree on World War One. So he was in favor, she was not.
So Mariah, you said you took a different approach to the Wharton Plot
Yes.
than you did with the Lindbergh Nanny in terms of balancing the historical accuracy and the fictionalized elements. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes. Well, with the murder of David Graham Phillips, there was an enormous, the case fascinated me and I kept thinking about it and I was like, how can I do it? Because in real life, the person who shot David Graham Phillips shot themselves directly afterwards. So, in fact, there is no mystery about who killed him in real life. But I thought, nobody remembers this case now. So I think I can get away with the only two witnesses have been dining a little too well at the Princeton Club, so maybe they were drunk. And everyone else is sort of startled and shocked, and the person gets away. So that was one change that I made. And I made one other change to play, in order to play fair with mystery readers. The person has to be in the book enough to be considered a genuine suspect.
Yeah.
Because I felt people would come to that novel for Edith Wharton as opposed to an exploration of that particular crime, everything that you read about Edith Wharton in the book is true.
Yeah.
Except for one thing, she didn't have a Pekingese with her on the trip. She had one of her Chihuahuas. But aside from that, everything else is accurate.
Now Edith is known for being sharp, intelligent. So how did you approach portraying her as an amateur sleuth?
Well, it is always that challenge, isn't it? When you're dealing with amateur sleuths, how do you get the reader to believe that someone would willingly undertake to investigate a murder, particularly when you know that is not what they did in real life. And I thought Susan Isaac did that so well in Compromising Positions. I mean, that's a reason that book is a classic.
Mm,
In Edith's case, because she is very sharp, because she is very intelligent, because she is a woman of means, which gives her a certain freedom of mobility that, the average woman might not have, that all helped. But there were two other qualities about her that I pinned my amateur sleuth identity on. One was she really liked to help/interfere in her friends' lives. She liked to take control and push people where she felt they needed to go or be. She was always trying to raise money for Henry James, and he found it incredibly annoying. So she was a take charge person. So when the murdered man's sister asks her to read his final book and protect it from the censors, I thought, yes, that's the kind of challenge Edith would take on. And that's how she gets involved in his death. The other thing is when she and Teddy were not getting along, as they were not at this time, uh, she liked to travel. She either sent him away on travel or she sent herself away on travel. And in this case, the two of them were trapped at the Belmont Hotel waiting for his doctor. So she has nowhere to go. So when she finds out that this writer, who she has met very briefly and disliked intensely, has died on her birthday, she's like, oh, I'll go to the funeral. Yes, that's only appropriate. I don't want to spend time with Teddy. I shall go to the funeral and I shall invite Walter to come with me. So all of that, I think, it made it credible within the bounds of an entertainment that she would be an amateur sleuth.
Okay, so now we've seen these historical figures, Mariah. Thank you for introducing them to us. What challenges did you face in bringing them to life on the page?
Well, with Edith, I mean, we agreed very quickly that Edith was going to be the sleuth. And the next morning I thought, oh, I have to write a book in the style of Edith Wharton, and I have to get inside the head of one of the most famously brilliant, eloquent women writers this country, or I think writers.
Mhm.
And Edith and I have certain things in common in that we are dog lovers, we are New Yorkers, we are writers. It ends there. Um, I am not wealthy, but I knew her and I liked her so much. And the voice in her letters was so strong, um, that I have something of a horror. I think we've all read those books or seen those movies where a real historical figure comes into view and somebody in the room has to say, "Oh, look, it's George Washington." And you kind of know it's him because he's tall and he has a powdered wig and somebody's told you it's him.
Yes.
Um, and that's what I really wanted to avoid. I wanted to do a deep dive on this woman because I was startled at how much weirdly we did have in common because she was in flux and I was in my mid 50s when I wrote this book. And my son was going to college. And I thought, your life has to keep changing. You can't just stay still. But what does that mean for everything that you built up until that moment? And these were questions that she was facing as well. So it felt like an enormously daunting challenge to get into her head, but it was easier than I thought. We had more in common than I thought.
Okay. So then it must have been very interesting for you to get into Betty Gal's frame
Yes.
of mind, I'm thinking then.
Well, it is interesting in terms of Betty Gal she was difficult. And I mean, any other human being is a challenge. But there is, of course, one other major character in this book, and that's Charles Lindbergh. And
Yes.
there's Betty is, to me, a fairly straightforward proposition. She is
Mm.
bright, she is prickly, but she's deeply loving. As you know, I could remember all those days with my toddler son, and the joys of that and the difficulties of that. I was actually an au pair for a summer, living in somebody else's house. So there were those things that I could draw on.
Hmm.
Charles Lindbergh is a very different proposition, and this was the first time I had ever written about actual historical figures. And let me say, if you start on this path, don't choose somebody like Charles Lindbergh, unless you want to be up at 11, 2 a.m. in the morning. Um, the challenge with him was the kidnapping happens before the infamous events around the America First movement, when he is an admirer. of Nazi Germany and Adolf
Mm.
Hitler. He feels they know how to run a country, unlike America.
Mm.
He famously argues that America should not enter the war against Germany and do nothing to save millions of European Jewish lives. He believes in euthanasia. However, I wanted to keep very strictly to what he did and said within the years covered by the novel. And of course, that was 1931 and 1935. I will reveal a spoiler. I don't think that he was involved in the murder of his son. And we can discuss why if people would like during the Q&A. Uh, Session, but that to me meant he was the father of a murdered child. And I felt that that had to be treated with sensitivity and respect. So there's, this image of Charles Lindbergh, the traditional, heroic image of the plane. That guy kind of leaves me cold. This guy obviously leaves me very cold.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I wanted to connect to a human Charles Lindbergh. This was the image that I went to. This is him and Anne in their early happy days. They look like toddlers, dressed up for bed. And they had a difficult bond. He was a bully. He was extremely tough. Both sides were unfaithful over the years. But he not only loved her, he admired her. And he believed in her talents and skills. And she's the only other person he puts in that plane with him, a man who trusts absolutely no one. He believed in her talent as a writer. And their bond is very strange, but I don't know, it's among the most appealing things about him. But I was very relieved when the people who run programming and research at the Lindbergh House, they said,
Mm-hmm.
"Yes, we feel you got him. You got him right."
Okay, wow. So, are there any misconceptions on these historical figures? I see that you were trying to portray him in a well-rounded manner. Are there any other historical figures or events where you tried to dispel any misconceptions or to clarify or explore in your writing?
I think, it's an interesting way to think about it. I mean, when I talk to people about Lindbergh or Wharton, I mean, some people adore Wharton, some people despise Wharton as, an aristocratic, white woman who lives in a bubble. Why would you bother reading her? She was famously sharp-tongued, as you said. And a lot of people did not like her during her lifetime. She did, however, have a very wide range of friends. But if you don't like Edith, and certainly if you despise Charles Lindbergh, I can't call it a misconception. I would say that what is more interesting to me in telling these people's stories is not to sort of look for the good guys or the bad guys in our history. But in both cases, you have highly intelligent, thoughtful people here. One of them went down what we would consider the right path. Wharton saw Hitler coming a mile away and knew it was bad news. Why didn't Lindbergh? What was it in his worldview and his nature that led him to embrace that? And I find it a humbling experience when I see intelligent, thoughtful people um, become uncaring and callous and even cruel. It leads me to examine my thoughts and my politics, and just to bear in mind the essential importance of humanity.
Yeah, yeah. Elaborating on Lindbergh, he also had a very particular belief system when it came to raising Charlie.
Yes.
Um, what was it like to research that? And was this something that was more commonly held, these ideas in that time period, or was this something that was um, more
I
specific to Lindbergh?
I think it was that the Lindbergh subscribed to the Watson method, which Betty Gow hated. I think it was probably somewhat cutting edge. And we know that, parents, especially mothers, you can fail in one of two ways. One is you don't spend enough love and time with your children, and the other one is that you spend way too much time and you smother them. The Watson method held that the worst thing you could do was smother them and foster, unhealthy dependency. So Charlie was left in a pen on his own as a baby. One imagines him sort of sitting in this pen in the yard with a few toys for hours. And nobody was allowed to go to him, even, if he cried. And this made Betty berserk. She could not stand it. It was very hard for her. And when she said to, Anne, like, we have to go to him, she said, no, there's nothing we can do. So, this was science of a kind. It's also science. You can absolutely see a cold fish like Charles Lindbergh saying, yes, that's obviously the way to raise a child. That appeals to my innate biases and prejudices.
Yeah.
An unhappy marriage, I think.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, this Lindbergh case was so well known, unlike the Wharton Plot, which, so how did you approach creating suspense um, or providing new insights for readers when it's such a well-known case that you're writing about?
Well, interestingly, um, I've discovered the facts of the case are not as well known as I thought they were. I've been very surprised when I do talks, and sometimes people raise their hands and they say, well, what happened when the baby came back? Did they find the baby? And I'm like, oh, okay. Um, here's some bad news. Um, I wanted the book opens with Betty going to the Morrow house for her interview. And what I hope that readers feel as she approaches this house is you don't know who this young woman is. You only know she wants to get in that house and she wants this job. And I think there's always an interesting trust fear dynamic when you are letting someone inside your house and you're giving them care of, your incredibly precious baby. And I wanted it
Mhm.
ambiguous, what kind of person she was. Historically, Betty did become very angry at the Lindberghs. I wanted you to feel that she could make a mistake. Um,
Mhm.
or do something terrible. Once it becomes clear that isn't going to happen, again, spoiler alert, um, the plot turns to whom among Betty's friends and associates was that inside collaborator with the kidnapper, which that was the police's working theory. I think it's a valid theory.
Okay. Now you have some other pictures of Betty and
Yes,
Edith, don't you? Can you share those? I think that was a good, give us some insight into our characters.
absolutely. Let's see. Um, this is a lovely picture of Edith when she was very young, and clearly her parents commissioned it, hoping in the marriage game. Um, I have one of my favorite images of Edith. And if we're talking about historical reality and capturing the truth of who these people are, one of obviously the portrait on the left is something that her parents had painted, and it's beautiful and lovely and this gorgeous cascading auburn hair, and she looks like such a happy 19th century child. On the right, you have the photographic reality of young Edith. And the poor child looks so anxious and so wary. And I'm surprised this photo was kept. And I will always err on the side of the photographic truth. Although, of course, you want to deliver on the drama and the beauty and the vividness of the personality and the history. But I always like showing this side as well
Yeah.
for little.
And I think you have another picture right above that one. That one's fascinating because that's a
This
setting image. Number
This was the
3.
this number 3. This was the inspiration or sort of the working image I had for the Wharton plot, because one of the things that fascinated me about the death of David Graham Phillips was it seemed like such a fascinating um, point of transition between sort of the old New York and world of the Vanderbilts that is so unequal and violent in its own way, but so everybody's in their place, right? And to the mechanized slaughter of World War One that we know is coming. And at the same time, Edith is leaving this world and committing an act of violence by getting divorced, which at that time, for those of us who watched The Gilded Age, know could have thrust her, beyond the pale of all the people she had known and grown up with her whole life. She really could have been putting herself into social exile. So, as I say, these were the clash and the transition that I really had in mind when I was writing this book.
So Mariah, as this Gilded Age you mentioned comes to a close, does Edith's writing change to reflect the new era? I'm curious how you capture this transition and how you conceptualize capturing this transition in Edith's thoughts and her internal dialogue throughout the book.
Well, at the time in 1910, 11, it's been about 6 years since her big hit, The House of Mirth, which of course is, a young woman trying to navigate the marriage market at a very high, wealthy level. And it was this huge expose of the cruelty of the New York elite. And she hadn't written anything like that since, and her publisher was getting a little bit antsy. Her recent novel had been The Fruit of the Tree, which was set in a poor mill town. It had themes of euthanasia and labor unrest, and they're like, "Oh, Edith, we just don't think that's really your subject." Um, and they were very, very excited about an upcoming novel about which would be the Undine Spragg novel, which was a return to the society gossip tale. And Edith at this point is a little more interested in the story of a person trapped in a terrible marriage in a cold house who finds love, which of course is Ethan Frome. And that for her feels more authentically what she's grappling with. So she's sort of going back and forth between these two books. And and you get the sense that as she says farewell to this world, hopefully, because of everything that she goes through and the sense she's about to go through, you can sort of see Age of Innocence coming in to view, which of course she won't write for another 10 years, but it's her look back at this world, especially through the perspective of a woman considering divorce.
Yeah.
So hopefully you have a sense of all of those books in her head.
Yes. Mariah, when I read the Lindbergh Nanny and the Wharton Plot, I read them back to back,
Oh,
and
you
I
thought they were
noticed
very different.
I noticed a very significant difference in the narrative style
Yeah,
between these two books. The Lindbergh Nanny was told in the first person,
right,
and the Wharton Plot was told in the third person.
right.
So, what led you to make these two differing choices for each story, and what do you find most challenging or rewarding about writing from these two distinct perspectives?
Oh my God. Well, Lindbergh Nanny, I wrote directly after the series, which was also first person. I always write, and up until then, up until Edith, I had always written first person. And I thought it would be the whole point is to see this event through Betty's eyes. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so of course we're going to tell that first person. And then when I got the bright idea of, oh, I'm going to have Edith Wharton be the protagonist, you look at her work, it's all third person.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to sound like Edith Wharton if it's first person. And the other thing that I thought is Edith can be very emotionally candid when you read her letters,
Mm-hmm.
particularly to her lover and friends. She's not going to be that emotionally candid. I think those would have been among the letters that she burned. Uh, and I just could not imagine her sharing so freely with, some stranger what she was thinking and doing. So it really had to be third person. And I'll confess honestly, I was totally terrified. Because I always thought my strength was first person voice. So it's one of those things where you hold your nose and you make the leap and you hope it works out.
Well, Mariah, I just have to say it really worked out because
Okay.
I, like many people, I grew up on Nancy Drew and I loved mysteries as a young girl. And as I got older, I kind of fell out of reading mysteries as much. And I read more nonfiction and I preferred science fiction more.
Um,
And this is one of the first times when I read the Wharton Plot where I thought, wow, you just had me hooked.
oh, thank you.
Yeah, I was just really hooked, and just seeing the perspectives and just knowing that these were based on real people too. And I promised myself that I wouldn't look online to see anything about them, so I would, be kept in suspense. And I think it was a part of the joy was the fact that it was a lesser known incident. With the
Mhm.
Lindbergh Nanny, we've read so many um,
Oh,
books, and we know so much about the case, even though, as you mentioned earlier, maybe some people may not know as much about the case as they thought they did.
absolutely.
But the Wharton Plot definitely was such a pleasure as someone who didn't know, and is trying to figure alongside Edith like what happened.
Oh, oh, great. Oh, I'm
and
so
and
glad.
yes, and what I really enjoyed was every single person seemed that they could have done it in a way, or they had some sort of motive. it, and that's always makes it fun. So I'm curious, as we're winding down a bit, if you could have a conversation, Mariah, with either Betty or Edith or both, what is one question that you would ask each of them?
Oh, Betty, I mean, of course you want to have a really candid conversation about what went on in that house. But I think I would ask Betty, how did you get through it? How did you come through on the other side? She had been a young woman who wanted to get married and had children. She never did. And I have to think that the trauma of losing Charlie had something to do with that. But by the last decades of her life, you felt she could talk about what happened, um, with a sense of peace and ease. And I'd be so interested to know how she managed that, um, while still holding Charlie clearly in her heart. Edith, I think I'd be very intimidated by Edith. Um, but um, I would want to know I would want to talk to her about Henry James and about Walter Berry, and how she maintained those friendships, which were so emotionally charged, and in James's case, sort of combative and jealous, and but so warm. Um, and I'd also love to hear about all the work she did during the First World War. I mean, my father-in-law was furious at me for not including that in the book. I was like, that was many years later, Larry. I can't, I can't put that in the book. But you know, the American government told Americans to leave France. She did not. She volunteered. She raised money. She set up studios where women whose husbands at the front could work and do weaving to earn money. She traveled to the front. She was incredibly active and dynamic in a way that I don't know that 16-year-old Edith would have imagined she would be. So maybe that would be a question. Did you think you would be the woman you became?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that this book really focuses on that turning point. You mentioned it being a turning point for history, but definitely a turning point for Edith.
Yes,
Almost like she's coming into her own.
yes.
Um, so it, in a way, it's not too far fetched to imagine her solving a mystery and then
Right,
and then having an epiphany in her life.
right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's beautiful. Mariah, do you mind? I'm going to stop your screen sharing because I guess
okay.
to close out, I was hoping that you would talk a little bit about your latest book that's coming out in days now.
Oh, you are so kind to ask.
Oh, yes. I
All
think you have a
right.
copy behind you that's so tantalizingly displayed.
I do, and I had one right here. Um,
Oh,
This is The Girl in the Green Dress, and it's out. It's actually, some stores have put it out now, but it's officially out on Tuesday. And after Edith, I swore I was not going to write about more writers, because for Edith, I had to read about Edith, I had to read about Henry James, I had to read about Morton Fullerton and David Graham Phillips. I read all his novels. And then I ended up writing about Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, um, who are, of course, very famous literary figures. But at the heart of the book, while Zelda is a huge character, is a young man named Morris Markey, who arrived in New York around 1921. And the reason I discovered Morris Markey was I was looking up New York crimes, as one does, and I found the 1920 shooting death of a gambler in Lothario named Joseph Elwell, who was shot inside his West 70th Street townhouse. All the doors and windows were locked. And I found this through an Esquire article that Morris Markey had written long after he left the New Yorker in 1950. And you got the sense it was sort of like, a tossed off piece, like, oh, that old jazz age murder, they never did solve it. Oh, isn't that interesting?
oh,
And that very year, he was found in his home in Virginia, shot through the head, and they've never solved that either. And the Elwell piece, the headline was it suicide or murder? And they've always asked the same question about Markey. So I wanted to travel back to 1920 and have a young Morris Markey um, solving this case as a tabloid writer. And I thought, well, how would he get into this very rarefied world? And I remembered that the Elwell case is one of the ones that's considered an inspiration for Gatsby. you have this mysterious man. Nobody knows how he makes his money. Reportedly, one of the women he was dallying with, her husband shot him. So enter the Fitzgeralds.
Wow. Well, thank you for setting up the story and background for us. That just sounds intriguing. And I want to wish you the best of, with you're going to be publicizing and
Thank you
and
so
and
much.
I know you've been busy leading up to this, so I really appreciate you joining us this evening.
Oh, such a
I haven't seen any questions, but Mariah, I'm sure that if anyone does have any questions, they'll pass it along to me, which I can pass along to you.
And anyone can reach out to me at mariahfredericksbooks.com. I always answer email. So,
Oh, that's wonderful. And then also you'll be joining us for our book group on September 11th.
yes.
At the end of our book group. Yeah, our book group tends to start at 2, and Mariah will be joining us for the last 15 to 20 minutes to answer all of our questions. And we'll be focusing on the Lindbergh Nanny for that one. All right. So, Mariah, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Kim. I have a wonderful time.
Yes, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. And if any of you want to join us, just go to penningtonlibrary.org, go to our book clubs, and you can register to join us. They'll be on Zoom. All right. Thank you. I'll see you then.
Thank you.
Have a great evening, everyone. Thanks again.
Good night.